In most video games, you're the hero. You can achieve amazing feats, fight the bad guys, and even save the princess from time to time. But what happens when you're the bad guy in a video game? No, not a gun-toting, flawed yet lovable, or at least fun, anti-hero, but a predator, the kind that's universally despised, the kind that preys on small things, cute things, innocent things, the kind that preys on children. Kill Monday's Little Misfortune and Molly's story in What Remains of Edith Finch by Giant Sparrow both explore this dynamic. Little Misfortune centers on a mysterious adult male voice luring a little girl into ever more dangerous scenarios as part of a twisted game for eternal happiness. Molly's story sees a hungry little girl transform into various predatory animals, feasting on everything from birds to humans before narrating that she will eat herself. If the mere premise of these games is making you deeply uncomfortable, well, you're not alone. Reviews for both stories cite how surprisingly dark they are, with Little Misfortune earning mixed reviews for what some saw as needless shock factor and vulgarity. Though Kill Monday's first feature game, Fran Bow, is reviewed significantly better despite being more gratuitous in its gory and disturbing visuals and dealing with many of the same themes. This may be in large part due to the fact that Little Misfortune's built-in feeling of complicity makes the tone of the game disturbing in a different and arguably more potent way. In both Little Misfortune and Molly's story, the predatory perspective enforced by the game demands the audience confront the horror of childhood trauma in a way that goes beyond eliciting removed sympathy to raw and visceral disgust.
Maybe I should try one so I can keep my breath fresh.
Little Misfortune begins with you, the player, watching Misfortune play with paper dolls on her bedroom floor as the mysterious voice tells you that this little girl, who lives in an abusive household, will die that day. His tone is genial, as if the idea of the doe-eyed child dying is appealing. However, he is surprised to learn she can hear his voice. All of this puts the player in an odd position. The voice, who we later learn is a demon called Morgo, is not surprised to be talking to you, as evidenced by his direct asides to you when Misfortune exits the frame. This aligns you with him, and yet you are the one manipulating the Misfortune avatar. Are you helping Misfortune or Morgo? One can only hope for the former, which puts significant pressure on the decisions you make for Misfortune, which Morgo claims are important. None of the decisions do turn out to be all that important, however, or at least they don't change the course of the story. Misfortune is unlucky at every turn, which often amuses Morgo, though he assures her that he doesn't want her to get hurt, even as he does things like request she enter the wolf's cage at the zoo. As Misfortune is lured along by Morgo and his game, she sees posters for missing children her age, making it painfully clear that Misfortune is just one in a long line of victims to Morgo and his ilk. However, there is a bright light in this gloom, a blue-eyed fox named Benjamin, whom Misfortune is in love with, and Morgo hates. Additionally, Misfortune has learned how to bring joy to the chaos of her life in a small but significant way. She loves glitter and frequently throws it over disturbing things in order to fix them. Though at first this seems like a trivial mechanic, meant only as a reference to how children cope with trauma, it is, in fact, the one mechanic that does carry significant weight. If, by the end of the game, you've thrown glitter over everything you can, Misfortune can give her mother something that is, if not eternal happiness, the next best thing. A loving cloud floats to her mother as she speaks with the police officer about Misfortune's death, and her mask, the same kind that most other adults in this world wear, falls off as she smiles through the tears. If you leave even one glitter opportunity behind, your mother will not receive this last gift. Either way, though, you are able to enter Sonercity, a realm of death, with Benjamin the Fox, who saves you from Morgo and the torment of being fed on by the demon in a hellish and unnatural dimension. It's a triumphant ending in some sense, but not a traditional one. Your reward for playing is a little girl's death, but while it might be upsetting to the player, she seems perfectly content, as engaged and curious to explore as ever. Still, playing Little Misfortune often feels deeply uncomfortable, if not just simply wrong. When Morgo asks you not to say anything to Little Misfortune about her death, you are silent. You have no choice, but the feeling is shameful anyway. And when you guide Misfortune through increasingly dangerous environments, her gaze frequently rests on the screen, on you.
Yes, I am. I don't know if I will like being dead.
You can make a few rebellious decisions, which is an ecstatic feeling considering the creeping sense of doom the game evokes, but in the end you find out Little Misfortune was dead the whole time, hit by her father's car after striking a deal with Morgo. Another source of discomfort in playing this game is in the tonal mismatches between what people expect from a sweet little girl like Misfortune and what she says and does. Some players did not respond well to the fact that Misfortune occasionally swears and is mature in other ways, including her matter-of-fact way of speaking about death and her romantic desire for Benjamin, all of which does not align with her proclamations that she is a little lady. But while those critics claim her characterization doesn't make sense, it seems clear that a child who has been exposed to swearing, death, and other age-inappropriate content would integrate some of those things into the way she thinks and speaks. What perhaps does not make sense, or what is hard to accept, is the child being exposed to such things in the first place. This is an example of what Dr. Annika Meyer, author of The Moral Rhetoric of Childhood, notes is a common tendency to conflate concern for children with concern for the child as a concept. On the subject of child abuse, she writes, "Adult indignation is not only motivated by the harm inflicted on children, but also by the infringement of adult ideals of childhood. These ideals are so powerful that they can even serve to work against the child, or depiction of a child in this case. If the child acts in a way that is at odds with the adult concept of childhood, which is pure and innocent, the child herself can be condemned." This seems to be the case with Little Misfortune, who is a complicated character with a strong will of her own. She's not just a simple depiction of an adorable child in a horrific situation, but a multidimensional human being. The same goes for Molly, who reveals two sides of herself that conflict in a way that goes against our adult ideals for a little girl. One side is childish, the other, predatory. Molly's story has received far less critical scrutiny than Little Misfortune, however, not only because it is a short passage within a larger game, but also because it is far more abstract and the sources of trauma are less obvious and extreme. Nonetheless, both the story and the broader game of What Remains of Edith Finch share many of Little Misfortune's themes. Molly's story is the first in What Remains of Edith Finch and sets the tone of a game in which death, particularly the death of children, is represented in evocative, surreal ways. You play as Edith Finch, a young woman who is revisiting her abandoned family home after inheriting it to find out the truth about her family. The player is told at the beginning of this aesthetically mesmerizing game that there is a curse on this family that dates back several generations. But is it a curse, or simply instances of bad luck and parental negligence assigned meaning by those who can least accept the reality? In any case, many Finches have died, and the central linchpin of the family, now deceased matriarch Edie, refused to let go of the house or any of its memories, despite Edith's mother, Dawn's, attempts at shutting out the painful past. Dawn has also died by this point, however, leaving behind a key that will give Edith access to all the shuttered rooms of the Finches who died. In story after story, you experience the last moments of a Finch, some of which are more straightforward than others. Molly's is among the most confusing. The story begins inside her adorable pink bedroom, where you look at the journal entry that foretells her death, shifting over to her point of view as you do. In the entry, she says she knows she's going to die and wants to explain how it will happen, which, like Little Misfortune, puts you in the distressing and powerless position of not being able to avoid death, despite being in control of the main character. Molly goes on to explain that she was hungry after being sent to bed without dinner, a practice that was perhaps common during childhood in her era, but is now generally considered cruel and unhealthy. She gets out of bed to look for something, anything, to eat. Disturbingly, one of the player's first options is to walk over to the gerbil's cage. Surely she won't eat her pet, will she? Thankfully, all she does is take a half-eaten carrot out of the cage and consume it. From there she moves on to her bathroom, where she ingests toothpaste and holly berries, both of which are poisonous to small children, but generally in larger quantities than what she consumes. Next, Molly hears a bird at her window and rushes to check it out. Then she transforms into a cat. The cat pursues the bird from branch to branch, wearing it out until she finally manages to consume it. The entire time, Molly keeps up her inner monologue, sounding just like a normal 10-year-old would, even down to calling the bird a mama bird, which somehow makes her ravenous pursuit of the cute little thing feel even more wrong. After that, she transforms into an owl, then into a shark, and finally into a sea monster who eats humans on a ferry boat. Eventually, however, that sea monster comes up through the toilet in her bathroom and slithers under her bed. At the end of her journal entry, Molly notes that she isn't dead yet, but she knows the beast, which she herself was piloting, is hungry, and she also knows that she will be delicious. It's an odd story, and there are several aspects about it that are unclear. Was she suffering a hallucination due to poison? Or maybe due to hunger? Or was she just dreaming? Did she have a tapeworm? What we're left with in the end, more than anything else, is a powerful sense of her all-consuming hunger. Not all of the stories in What Remains of Edith Finch are quite so horrific, but some are arguably even more upsetting, like the death of baby Gregory in the bath. Still, while the death of baby Gregory had a horrible inevitability to it, no story in the game other than Molly's subverted the conceit in such an unsettling way, making the victim into a gleeful predator in a manner seemingly designed to make the player feel conflicted or even guilty. While this might seem unduly manipulative, this tactic is extremely effective at conjuring a nuanced range of unpleasant emotions that go beyond the anxiety and fear instilled by most typical horror games. When you play the vulnerable character in a horror game, the experience may be anxiety-inducing, but there is also a certain comfort in your inherent knowledge of game design. You are the avatar, and thus there is a way for you to survive. You may die once or twice or maybe even 20 times, but those deaths aren't counted in the long run. In the end, if you keep at it and keep pushing forward, you'll win. In Little Misfortune and Molly's story, that comforting dynamic is flipped on its head. Every step you take forward could be, and in fact is, a step toward the death of the cute, vulnerable thing you'd wish to protect. This creates a feeling of dread. When something bad happens, you're angry and upset that you couldn't avoid it, infuriated with yourself for being involved in a scenario that cannot be won. These feelings of powerlessness, shame, and frustration offer a fuller emotional portrait of pain and trauma than fear alone. In analyzing this effect, it's helpful to use a formalist lens, which is traditionally a tool of literary criticism, but can be applied to games, as shown in A Preliminary Categorization of Techniques for Creating Poetic Gameplay by Mitchell, Quay, Neo, and Sim. Formalism espouses the idea of defamiliarization, a strategy that undermines reader expectations in order to slow down perception. One of the creators of formalism, Viktor Shklovsky, noted that this method is used to impart the sensation of things as they are perceived, and not as they are known. In the case of Little Misfortune and Molly's story, the defamiliarizing tactic is presenting a childhood trauma using a predatory perspective. This imparts more emotional force than a traditional story told through the eyes of a victim, because the strangeness of the perspective slows down your perception and causes you to feel the sensations provoked by this sort of unpleasant tale more deeply. But is it really necessary that these games generate such negative emotions? Or is it overkill, as some critics have suggested? It's important to note that the answer is contextual. If either game acts as a trigger to traumatic memories of the player's own experience, it's certainly valid to avoid them. Some players who have experienced abuse may find the narratives affirming, however, and in a broader sense, there's an argument to be made that these stories offer an empathetic and thoughtful counterweight to the large number of child deaths used in mainstream game narratives as plot or character-building shortcuts. As Susan Xiaoming Tan notes in Burn With Us, Sacrificing Childhood in the Hunger Games, the vision of the dead child is one of the most horrific images in cultural imaginations. It is also one of the most pervasive. Children are the perfect victims, vulnerable and innocent, making their death or abuse a frequent plot device to signal which characters are villains, which characters are heroes, and what kind of world the game exists within. But very rarely are they present in video games as fully dimensional characters. Little Misfortune and What Remains of Edith Finch are rare examples of games with playable children characters. In a sample of commercially successful and critically acclaimed video games from 2009 to 2019, analyzed by Emma Ray, she found that less than 9% of the games surveyed had child avatars. There are many reasons for this, but most come down to the perception of children as weak, vulnerable, and innocent. However, that doesn't mean child characters are not present in the games. As previously mentioned, children are frequently used as victims, sometimes in lurid detail, but primarily in ways that help craft a larger narrative where their abuse or death is secondary to the main adult character's journey. In Little Misfortune and Molly's story, the dead little girls themselves are at the center of their narratives, in all of their oddness and imperfection. They are not little ladies or pictures of pure childhood innocence. They are children undergoing trauma. It isn't easy to see, let alone play a role in, but it shouldn't be. The real disservice would be to make these stories easily palatable and sanitized. The discomfort evoked by the predatory perspectives in these narratives is at the core of their message. There shouldn't be a world in which this happens, in which a child is made to feel this way. With their flipped perspectives, these games by Kill Monday and Giant Sparrow manage to capture the feelings of childhood trauma in a unique and unsettling way. Little Misfortune and Molly's story make players not only know the pain of their characters, but feel it too.